Hey, Philogeans, those of us who like our spirituality with a twist. So we are continuing our discussion on Gnosticism. In this episode, having the start of a conversation on like different features and aspects of it that we happen to find particularly fascinating and interesting and relevant. So that's kind of what we're up to here. We like to do these little series, and this is a part of not only our series on like Christianity, but our Christianity series is a part of a bigger series called America, What the Hell? Where we've been trying to figure out like what's going on in the world and have conversations from our own angle on that. So that's what we're going to be up to again, but really focusing on like Gnostic stuff. So we'll be talking about different aspects of Gnosticism, but with the background of these thoughts of an idea and ideas of how it applies to the world around us now. But before we get started, if you can do all the things that people ask you, that would be great. The likes or subscribe or share an episode, write a review, all the cool stuff that everyone always asks you to do. It helps us out. As Daniel always says, this is a labor of love, and we love doing it. So your love and support back would be appreciated. And there we go.
And
So,
Eric,
yep.
let me give a shout out to ourselves for a moment here.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
yeah, and people to different people listen or watch or whatever, but if you've been paying attention, if you've been watching what we've been doing and what we've been covering, I mean, we really have given a lot of background for what's happening now. A lot of the, we could say, like underlying currents or forces that are currently at play. And that absolutely is our intention. It's to, look at what's happening now and then put our, sort of spirituality, religious glasses on and say, what are those forces doing to society? What are the through lines that have been here for longer than we probably have been aware of them on one hand? And then on the second hand, how does that motivate people, right? How does that motivate them to act, to not act? And some of the secret language that is coded in everyday conversation that is occurring in both the media and with, people who make decisions and whatnot, and how they get consent from the population. And maybe not just not consent, but maybe that they are in an outpouring of people's desire from the teachings that they have been taught. And in previous episodes, that would have been the proto-Orthodox Christians, which would be very motivated by revelations. And so when we see the movement, the intense movement towards end times discussions and those leanings, then when you have decisions that are made on a global scale, now we're involved in a, multinational conflict. And, you hear the horror stories and you see the things on TV probably not TV at this point. Media is kind of trash, but you see it on Instagram or you see it wherever else, TikTok or Facebook or whatever, YouTube. You, I think the compassionate people would wonder, how can this occur? How does this happen? How does this happen so often in human history? And when you believe yourself to be part of something larger or guided by a hand that is creating the story of the universe, you are justified. You believe yourself to be justified in doing anything, anything at all. And that kind of motivation, while if used positively, can be amazing things can happen. But if used negatively, then devastation is absolutely the language of these people because their intentions are to bring destruction. So we have been talking about this in a, direct and also roundabout way. And I just wanted to highlight the fact that, we're trying to ride the wave before the wave crests. And I think we're almost there. We're at least we're right with it anyways.
Yeah, I mean, this whole thing is heartbreaking. You and I are both feel it, the suffering of all the people who are caught in the midst of these things.
Yeah.
And it's been a little bit, we're doing these episodes on Christianity, and it's like a painful subject, right? But like having to look at like, okay, there's a part of this orthodox tradition of Christianity, not everybody, but there's a line of it that's toxic, unfortunately, right?
Hmm.
It's we've done episodes on like the fascinating psychologist Wilhelm Reich, and he talks about emotional plague when you get toxicity, and this is toxic. You
Hmm.
just make a diagnosis and have to call it, and it hurts to have to talk about these things. But I think part of our goal, at least in this, is to share ideas around it that have a lot of substance to them, right?
Hmm.
When you were talking, I think a lot of people, and it's all good. We all have our own feelings and opinions. A lot of people give kind of like hot takes. I think it's good, right? I was thinking we're giving like ancient takes or
Right.
like classic takes. Sometimes that's our thing, to be educational, right? But to, see how that connects to what's happening now. Yeah. And yeah, so that's our attempt, y'all. That's what we're
That's
trying.
it.
That's what we're trying to do.
That's
I
what we
was
are
saying,
doing. We're not trying. We're
yeah,
doing
not even
it.
trying. We are doing it. Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Give us ourselves our full credit on it. Yeah.
So.
There is a context for this. I just wanted to share a little bit, as I was thinking up, my notes for what we're doing with this is, we've been trying to talk about different aspects of like the Christian tradition, and it hopefully opens up possibilities of like thinking that there's other options within that tradition that you can find yourself into, right? There's other versions of Jesus, other ways of talking about him that's out of this toxicity, right? But I wanted to share too that, there's a really deep kind of Buddhist or Buddhist tantric idea about understanding the beliefs and the systems of people around you, right? Because in doing that, that becomes a way of understanding others and then to be of more help to others, right? And that's a pretty deep tradition. So, as I was thinking about what we're up to, you're talking about that aspect. You were talking about Daniel. There's another aspect which is deeply rooted in the kind of traditions what we're drawing from, where you look at the world around you and the beliefs of the different people around you and you document them. And you say, okay, these was what these people seem to think,
Mm.
As an example, when you got people doing this in China, they were going, okay, what do Taoists think? And they would jot that down, to try to capture what they thought the Taoist mindset was, to understand people, right? And then understanding is power, right? So this is what the Taoist thinks, or this is what a Confucian thinks. And there's a certain power in being able to do that. And, we've been running through these different versions of what different types of Christian people think so that we can understand where all the different people are at within this panoply of possibilities within this tradition. But that's how you understand people, and that's how you try to be helpful to people too. So I just wanted to point that out at the beginning. It's not just our idea. We are getting to something that has a deep root to it, right?
Yeah.
Millennia's old root. Okay. Okay, let's look and see, what do people actually think. That's a psychological thing. It's also like a philosophical, spiritual thing, so you can figure out where people are at. And unfortunately, we have to spend time talking about the toxic aspects of Christianity. I wrote this in my notes too, and I know you were talking about it already, but we this war started. Like, this is our first episode after this war, right? So now the United States is in a like and allies are in a like an incredibly bloody war, right? And as far as like the toxic aspects of Christianity, there's like all of our like a slew of our public figures that are out there taking this attitude of like, yeah, this is a holy war, this is a crusade, we're back to that again. That's the old line from The Godfather. Every time I try to get out, they pull me back in. We're back to this fucking shit again. So, it's painful to say these names, but Lindsey Graham, this is a holy war. I saw him quoted that will determine the next 1,000 years.
Oh,
You're
wow.
like, oh,
Good thing there's no delusion of grandeur with that one.
yep. Mike Johnson, who's our House of Representatives, some people call him Moses Mike because of his claims of visions.
Because his is
Moses
it
Mike
because of his
Johnson.
love for men or
That's another part. That's another part of Mike's.
mm.
He has layers.
Like Trident.
He has layers. And like, it was interesting because he was like, we have to stop Islam's misguided religion.
Hmm.
Back to that holy war. One Pete Hegseth and the military propaganda about that. I don't know what you thought about that, this stuff, Daniel, but this whole idea of people talking about like Trump is anointed by Jesus in order to light the signal fire to cause Armageddon and trigger the rapture. Apparently, that's going out to the soldiers. And when I was hearing that, I was thought, okay, would Daniel imagine hearing that kind of stuff? Was that anything that was around when you were in the service? Was those kinds of things said?
No,
Okay,
no,
that was a short answer and to the
yeah,
point.
no, no.
Okay.
And and I mean, it's been a
Well,
while
people who
since
don't
I,
know, sorry, but Daniel served in Iraq, right? So he has
yeah,
experience with this. He knows. Hmm.
yeah, when I was in that, there definitely is kind of an in club if you are active in the church, for sure. People hang out with you, you have access to higher ranking folks and different people who you could sort of cross, if you want to call it party lines, but you can cross commission, non-commission, commission. I mean, meaning non-commissioned officers like a sergeant and commissioned officers like a captain or something like this. Normally, you're not supposed to fraternize, but if you're engaged in the church, you can meet people who you might not normally meet, and that's called networking, and that's good. But the part about that also is not good is that if you know you're not in that in group, then maybe you might be left out a little bit for something. So this is definitely a thing. This is definitely a thing. However, outside of maybe some friendly deals that you might be able to get, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying that's part of it, right? It's not about what you know, it's who, right? Um, but when it came time for mission, you didn't need any extra motivation. So when I heard this, I was really kind of confused as to why would anybody who is active duty need further motivation. And so that's why I go back to what I said previously. If you are giving yourself I don't even know what's the right way to describe it, but like the permission of God, the guidance of the Creator, this sort of like inevitable movement in forward history that is going to unfold with the help of you, well then what would you not do? Is the bigger question. What would you stop yourself from doing or not stop yourself from doing, knowing that that is the wind at your sails? The wind at your sails is literally the desire of the creator. That's the sail. That's the pitch. And as somebody who served in wartime, who lost friends, who definitely saw things, which you know and I don't mean for people who've never served, it's not, you don't have to if you don't want to. And I'm definitely not here like, waving the yellow flag, saying support the troops. You should support the people who are out there because, their lives are on the line and it's dangerous and whatever. We should also support the civilians who, whatever. And we should honor life, which means acknowledge death and how tragic it is for those of us who are still here, the ones we lose. You know what I'm saying? But the bigger point is that like why would you need extra motivation? You're a professional soldier. That's your job. You have signed up, you have given your life, you've already given your life over to the country and you've said basically when you sign your name on that paper and you get shipped off and trained, you are saying, I trust in the judgment of people who are above me to know where to put me and when to put me there. You've already yielded your will. You've already yielded your body and your life to other people to do what they will, right? So why is it that you would need extra motivation? In particular, the military is not 100% a Christian organization. So why would you be inciting a Christianic ideology to everybody? It makes no sense for me. It honestly it breathes weakness. It breeds weakness in underlying ideologies and desires for why it is that we're there. And the fact that we have been talking about this now for the last, month and a half, and I know sometimes the audience likes us to move on a little bit, but we could not have been at this point in this episode right now without all the other episodes that we have done previously up until this point. And so I know we sometimes drive the point home pretty poignantly, if, I use that word multiple times. The reason for which is for right now is for people to understand that these things are not just topics of conversation. This is alive currently, and it is absolutely shaping our world in ways that it hasn't in probably a really long time. It's left the halls of conservative organizations, and it is now in the halls of Congress, essentially, and in the halls of other Congresses in other countries. And it's alive and well, and it's breathing, And I don't think it has anything to do with religion at all, actually. I think this is kind of the same belief as in aliens, the same madness.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you're going to look at the world around you and you're going to try to understand that these are the subject matters you have to cover. There's just no way
Yeah,
around it. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, okay. So, the other part that's coming up in all of this is like this connection back to like the land and this notion of like rebuilding the third temple is like being talked about all the time now, right? Which will just make things explode. Um, you know, and our one of our ambassadors, one Mike Huckabee, was talking about, this whole mythology of like what has to happen with the Jewish state and how it has to like expand to this thing to trigger the rapture and all this stuff that's going on. So, as a belief system, educational for all of us, this whole thing, if you've never heard this phrase before, I will lay it out for y'all. It's a thing called dispensationalism. It's part of like certain aspects of evangelical Christianity. And I've heard people talk about it, Daniel. I'm sure you have too. You hear that phrase like sometimes if you like pay attention to these circles and what's going on, dispensationalism. Um, and so, the notion behind this is that human beings are going to kind of like push the divine plan forward ultimately, right? By, creating these conditions that are going to trigger the rapture to come. And the dispensational idea is that there's different like dispensations of like the divine or God's relationship to human beings. So again, if it's going to start appearing in the media, and it probably will, we're usually pretty timely on these things, right? We start talking about something and it's going to find its way around. So if you've never heard this before, to give you the clue of what's happening with this and to explore this aspect of what we're calling proto-orthodox thought, right? Per like scholars of religion. This subpart of that is the idea that God interacts with humanity in different ways. So, quick version of this, just so we all can get it. Because have you heard this phrase before, dispensationalism, Daniel? Is that something
No.
that's crossed your path? Okay. So, the dispensations come from like readings of the Bible, in the idea that there's these stages of the way that God is going to interact with human beings. So, as an example, in the beginning, it's the stage of innocence, and it's the Garden of Eden based on these biblical stories until something terrible happens. Eve eats the apple, everything goes to shit. But that's a stage. Then you enter the next stage, which is human beings living within this, being tossed out of the garden and kind of living in this proto time until God wipes them out with a flood. And the idea that like there's going to be destruction is like part of this thing. It's these stories of like things being wiped out essentially in a lot of this stuff. Then it continues on, and then you start having after the flood another dispensation that hovers around human beings, and that one ends with the biblical story of the Tower of Babel, where all the people try to build a tower up to the vine and God wipes them out.
Mm.
And so there's always this part too.
I
The
think
next, yeah,
that created the game Jenga.
yes,
Yes, that's
yes.
correct.
We're all like doing miniature versions of that. How hard can
That's
we make the tower before God knocks it down because you pulled the wrong piece out?
that's right.
And then there's another part to Abraham. I'll do it quick. That's a segment. Then there's another part of the story up to Moses and the revelations to Moses. And then there's Jesus and Christianity. And then the whole thing is you always know where it's going to go in the end. Drum roll, pss, the rapture. It's always going to go to Revelation, and there's going to be another destruction and devastation. And it's strange because, part of this dispensationalist idea has to do with like whatever Orthodox Christianity or this kind of evangelical, this subset of Christianity thinks about, how the Jewish people fit into this story too. And if you don't know this, there's a whole thing about like what they call the two-thirds scenario, where once the temple is rebuilt and the rapture starts, the Jews are going to get wiped out. So, you know, it would seem like it would be good for a while, but the Christians are not on your side in this. They're waiting for two-thirds of y'all to get wiped out. So that's the idea. And then very famously, there's this notion of what they call the millennial period. Christ will rule on earth. After one kind of line of destruction, he'll rule on earth for 1,000 years, and you'll get another line of destruction, and that's the end of the whole story, and creation is over. It's kind of bizarre in the sense too. So that's the millennialism. And I had heard of dispensationalism, but I had never heard anyone like really define like what's a dispensation? What are they talking about? It's supposed to be these different little periods of time that define how God is relating to the world within this sort of line of thought. So, anyways, I wanted to share it. Obviously, on a certain level, all of this has a toxicity within it, right? And in terms of our Gnostic stuff, this is like one of the like alternative versions that is trying to fight against these orthodox ideas. And so, that's within the Christian tradition too. So, I mean, I think that's what matters to me, that there's this kind of toxic, oppressive orthodoxy. As we talked about in previous episodes too, it's fair to say that those are elements in lots of traditions, not just in this one. But
Correct.
this one is like super active now, y'all. It's in high gear. And, there's just no way around that. Now, as when we get to our Gnostic stuff with this, Gnostic stuff is trying to like challenge this. And it goes back to something at the root, obviously, within this tradition, let's say, right? There was always these different tensions that were always there. These aspects that were oppressive and toxic and reactionary, and then other parts that were trying to be challenging in response. It's been there from the very beginning. So, anyways, that's the idea. You got more on that, Daniel, or no? I
Hmm.
wanted to do the little educational thing on the dispensationalism. I'll bet you that word is going to find its way out now into the sphere. Sometimes that happens with our little pod. We start talking about something and we're like right on that cusp of recognizing, okay, this is going to start to appear, and you might start seeing that phrase. So if you're listening, you kind of know what people are talking about, right? Mm. Okay, so like to my mind, switching gears on that a little bit, we wanted to talk also about Gnosticism and different aspects of it. And I think the one that occurred to me first, Daniel, to talk about was to look at the problem of like suffering in the beginning, right? Of the
Hmm.
whole thing. And talk about what the Gnostic attitude is, but also compare it to sort of some of the other traditions we've been talking about, other ways of thinking, other paradigms, to figure out what does Gnosticism have to say about this and how does this like fit into how other people view this. So I don't know, like, let me throw it back to you. I have always thought that this question of the problem of human suffering is like core, right?
Hmm.
I've always thought about this, and I'm sure you have too. So, I mean, you got thoughts about that before we go in and
In
start?
what way? In what way?
I just thought maybe it was some little Buddhist part of me. I was like, I care a lot about the whole problem of human suffering and how does it end? Has that been a thing for you too? I mean, I've always been kind of thinking about that. It probably was part of the reason why I got interested in Buddhist stuff, because one of the ideas of Buddhism is how do you end suffering, right?
Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, I think the hope is that suffering itself does something to you. And specifically, the suffering of others does something to you. The suffering experience within oneself from one's own life or experience does something to the person because they're going through it. So they're being affected by it, and then the reaction to that experience moves them in one way or the other. Okay. but you're sort of subject to that. It's not like you have a choice. Fine. You have a choice in your reaction, but you might not have a choice in the experience of it happening to you based on where you're born or whatever the case might be. Sometimes the color of your skin or society, anything like this, health wise. Well, I think the question for me is what does the suffering of others do to you? So when you see suffering in other people, does it motivate you in one way or another to do something about it? To be a source of assistance, to be a place of solace, to be a refuge, to be an assistant, to be, something. And in some ways, it can, you can have a career out of this if you want, in some way, shape, or form. You could be a paramedic if you want to help people in their greatest time of need when they reach out, right? If you want to keep people safe, you can be a police officer. If you want to, help people to not
Yeah,
burn,
medical
firefighter,
people,
like
right?
whatever.
Yeah, yeah, medical people.
Yeah,
Yep.
medicine. Like there's
We're
all
like
kind, all
motivated by that even personally, right? Yeah.
yeah, totally. Yeah, exactly. But then on the on a larger scale, you wonder what the suffering of others does to people who might not be directly related to that suffering, right? So for people who, in this case, are pro-intervention, right? Military intervention. Well, if you were to be in proximity to, let's say, someone being partially crushed by a building that fell on them or a ceiling, right? And you have to hear them scream until they die because they're going to bleed out. I don't know. Does that do anything? Does that not you, but does that make that person feel any kind of way? Or that, people will be absolutely incinerated by bombs as they go off. Like incinerate. You cannot count their death because there's nothing left of them, right? Does that concept, let alone the reality that it happens and it happens frequently, does that not do anything to you? Or does your ideology supersede the peace in you that I would hope reacts to the suffering of others? And if the answer to that question is no, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do with that. To me, that's the problem. That's the real problem of suffering from my perspective. I think it's an avoidable illness and things like that, right? Life is going to happen. This is going to do its thing. But these things are avoidable. And I don't know how to, as a spiritual person, as a person without much political power or anything else like this, other than voting, if that even counts anymore, who knows, right? Um, I don't know how to address that. I don't know how to change this. And I don't know how to stoke that fire in other people to say, like, we might not agree on everything. I don't know exactly what to do with I don't know, TIF money or what to do with surplus in tax revenue. I don't know what to do with this. I don't know how to manage federal funds for disaster relief. I don't know. I don't know this. But I do know that we should be able to agree on the voluntary suffering of other people on a mass scale that is absolutely and 100% unnecessary. I think we should be able to agree that we should try our best in every single attempt to avoid this at all costs. And yet, we find ourselves disagreeing about the most basic things, and to me, this is the most basic thing. And so, yeah, that to me, that's the problem that I see. You're muted.
Sorry. Lips removing, nothing coming up. Yeah, I mute sometimes just to let the flow go. Um, yeah, when I think about this, in the very first day of this war, there was like the bombing of a girls' school. And, you kind of look at something like that and you can debate like whose munitions fell. It doesn't really matter, does it? Because the girls are gone. And, I think, part of like, we were talking off mic about this evocative Buddhist term, bodhicitta, which is the desire to spiritually improve yourself, to be a benefit to yourself and others, ultimately, maybe even to achieve something like enlightenment, like if you want to get really deep down the possibilities of this and you want to have faith in maybe even these extreme spiritual accomplishments. But in any case, the idea is that based on love and compassion, you want to go and improve yourself to be a benefit of self and others. Okay, that's bodhicitta, right? And part of that is the ability to develop this purposeful goal of developing compassion and love. Compassion then having a specific idea, which is the desire to see other beings saved from harm. Love being the idea of seeing other benefits, other beings thrive and grow and benefit, right? So the compassion side is more the protective side, the saving from harm. The other side is the more wanting to see other beings benefit. So this is sort of like a Buddhist psychological idea. To the greater extent you can kind of develop this in yourself, the more powerful your spiritual practice is going to be. And one would think, from what you were saying in the context of this, that just being able to use one's imagination in a kind of meditative sense and say, what would it be to like to be a girl who's in that situation, right? All of a sudden your life being cut short in that way, or even if you survive, watching your friends being taken away from you, or the parent of those. It's not a hard leap to be able to do that. It's a small thing of like empathy and compassion to do that. And that is in a certain sense a kind of a meditation then, right? You meditate on what you were bringing up, the suffering of others, to like spark that inspiration in yourself, right? So then the question becomes like, why doesn't that spark? There's even two ways of looking at it. Wouldn't that be an easy kind of empathy to build? And then the other part would be, isn't on some level, given the theory of like Buddha nature, that we all have ultimately at the core, like a good core to who we are, right? A good spiritual core in every living thing, right? Then you have to ask the question, like, well, why is that obstructed? Like, what is going wrong with that that doesn't allow that to spontaneously and naturally express itself, right? Or allow that self to be triggered by like these little bits of empathy, that would seem to be enough to trigger it. And then what I hear, and part of what you're asking is like, well, why is that not happening? And in terms of what we're talking about, the Gnostic thing versus the proto-Orthodox thing, if we want to like just use that as our framework, that means there has to be something that is, like, uh, I don't know what the right word is, brainwashing. There has to be something that's brainwashing you to take you away from what otherwise would be a very natural response. There has to be something that's being done. And then, of course, that's the critique, if you want to get Gnostic from the way we're talking about this, of like what these toxic spiritualities do to people. They take them away from something that is very easy to trigger just by the tiniest bit of like meditative imagination, or take them away from something that should be a natural response at the core, anyways. And somehow you're being pulled away from that, by using your phrase, teachings, but teachings that are toxic, right? Are in some ways maybe potentially even designed to pull people away from what otherwise would be very natural acts of compassion and very natural acts of empathy that might even be even spiritually intrinsic. So, that's a fascinating question. And now you're in the heart of like this set of questions. This is like a deep fucking set of questions. And as we are a little podcast, okay. But, as human beings, as living things, we have to fucking crack this thing. This nut has to get cracked so we can get ourselves out of this shit. So, anyways, there's a plea around that, but like an interpretation too. And this is, part of the reason why we thought this is important to talk about, because you have to be able to explore, like, what is it that we be pulling people away from this? There's like, again, within the more toxic aspects of this, the shit that we're calling out, there's parts where they devalue empathy and compassion. This whole idea of like toxic empathy that cuts your judgment of others that are not of the same beliefs as you, and that's wrong somehow. This is a whole thing within this segment, and if you don't know about it, search it out. It's a part of what people are being taught too. That empathy is bad, compassion is somehow bad. How the fuck did we get here? Right? And that is within a line of teachings that are toxic. Yeah.
In line of teachings and in pop culture.
I guess that's true too. It's within the culture at large. I was talking more about like the way it is in like sort of toxic religiosity circles that are starting to dominate what's happening. But I guess you're
Yeah,
talking about something else too. What's your popular
both.
cultural
I mean,
piece?
both. Both. You have in toxic religiosity, for sure. There is us and there is the other. The other is they're not us. They're, you know, at best, they're useful tools for us to toss in the fire to keep us warm. At worst, they are an obstacle to our greatness and must be shredded and dealt with, you know? And then in the culture, in the pop culture, you have this is this could not represent what what people have been calling toxic masculinity to a more clear point, right? It's this idea that the outside world is there for you to take advantage of. That's why it's in existence. And all of your problems are other people's problems. That's what they're doing to you. You're a victim. So unvictimize yourself by taking advantage and victimizing others. That's the path. That's the key, and that's what they're teaching. But what that is teaching them is to desensitize yourself to the suffering of others. And it is Eric and my belief, deep belief actually, that the natural response to something suffering is to help. I mean, I don't know how many times I've seen something in real life, and people's nervous systems are different, so not everybody reacts the same way, but generally when you see somebody who needs help, right? They're in the grocery store and they have a heart attack, or they get hit by a car, or there's some kind of tragedy or something like this. I don't recall seeing many people laughing at that person as they're on the ground suffering, going through whatever they're going through. I don't recall seeing many people um, take cheap shots on them,
I think
punch them while they're down.
you're gonna go to the social media aspect of this. I think you're working your way back to that.
No, no, I wasn't even.
Oh,
I
you
mean,
weren't. Okay. Sorry, I
yeah,
wasn't
no,
mean like,
I'm
but I
what
was
I'm
just thinking
saying
that's
is,
profound, because you can do all that stuff from a distance through those
well,
tools,
that's yeah.
right?
Also, that part
Yeah.
is
But
that like
anyways, I know you like that subject matter is important to you, so I
yeah,
thought maybe
fuck
you're going
social
that
media,
way.
so we can go there too, right? It's
Yeah.
like, but being there in person, I have never seen anybody do that. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm just saying I've never seen it. Have you ever seen someone suffering in real life and walk by and just like kick them while just continue to walk on if the police are called? Like, people generally want to help other people. Of course, when you step away in social media, then you'll get people talking shit. I don't think they would talk shit in person. I really don't. And then when you're even further removed and it's happening on the other side of the world, and then now you get people who don't believe the same as you, well, it's easy to wave your flag around and say they're not on my team. Go team, you know? Let's win. What are we winning? It's and I think and Eric, you could certainly fill in a little bit on this. I think the Gnostic view, because this is supposed to be a podcast on Gnosticism, um, the Gnostic view is that that's the influence of like the false god, the god of the Old Testament, the god of parts of Revelations, this spiteful revenge driven god of desire that wants to be worshipped, and then it pervades across our reality through its they call them archons, but like through its influence to keep us essentially in a state of fighting and suffering. Is
Well,
that
that like, yeah, that gets to like the whole Gnostic aspect of this. I agree. And you don't even have to make it like the God of any particular thing. If you want to make it the Old Testament, that's what they were arguing against specifically. But
Yeah.
let's say you come up with any divinity that functions that way. We invent a new religion tomorrow and we say the religion of our thing is that it's on our side against everybody else.
Oh, okay.
And
Well,
nobody
we're
else counts. And it's up for us to run over everybody else as long as we're doing the deeds of this divinity, then something has gone dramatically wrong, even if we just invented it tomorrow, or no matter where you find that, something is wrong, right? And that could be like the bigger Gnostic idea, right? Even outside the context of these people who are maybe we're talking about, uh, you know, uh, this particular proto-Orthodox thing that they were reacting against, that phrase for the traditions that the Gnostics were kind of like in conflict with historically. But like invent one now, right? Invent another one, right? It'll still be just as toxic, right?
yeah.
Because it's toxic at the root. And then when we get to the idea of suffering, and that, like maybe we'll do a little of this today, and then we'll have to like move along and to be continued in future episodes. But like what struck me is like in the Buddhist world or the Buddhist tantric world that we're using kind of as part of our home base, but any of the spiritual ideas I think that we're trying to promote via our podcast, right? Or share, let's say, not promote is probably even a better word for that, right? Is okay, this problem of suffering is going to be taken very seriously, right? And then you can see, well, how do different mindsets try to address this problem of suffering? And if we're going to like, which seems to be our vibe of the day, because we're both up in arms about this, if we're going to talk about toxic, certain kinds of toxic orthodoxies, right? You know, part of what happens within that too is this idea that the reason they're suffering, and we'll get back to like the tantric and Buddhist ideas around this, how do you solve suffering if you get out to more of those ways of thinking? But if we're going to talk about the thing that I think we're both we're both feisty on today, this is a feisty episode. But
Spice.
when you look at it, like that understanding is there's a divinity, and that divinity is there to punish you.
Mm.
So punishment is like where the suffering comes. The divinity is kind by its nature, but you fucked up, and
Mm.
now it's going to punish you,
What else
right?
is new?
And that's where the suffering comes from. And even the notion of like you've got a divinity, it's given you free will so that you can transgress and it can punish you. And then that's where the suffering is. And then the punishments can get more and more violent, right? Depending on how far you want to push this. So that's kind of like when you think of like where does suffering come from? If you really take it as like a philosophical, spiritual point and you get serious about it and you try to trace it through different ways of considering this question, that's kind of the thing. Or you get the other part, which is the idea that the divinity works in mysterious ways and therefore it's just punishing you, or they're suffering for some reason that you don't understand, but somehow it must be for the good ultimately in some way up the road or something, right?
Hmm.
Like I think these are the two answers that you get within the proto-orthodox point of view. I've talked a little bit about like one of my favorite scholars on these questions, New Testament scholar and like scholar of a religion and ancient religion overall, Bart Ehrman. And like this actually was interesting because it was this set of questions that drove him out of religion overall in the end, because he didn't know how to reconcile this, in a way he couldn't figure out like if there was this all good, all powerful being, why would there be all of this suffering? And the explanation is, well, you did stuff that was wrong, so this divinity has to punish you. Didn't seem compelling to him anymore, I suppose, right? And how he talks about it. And then the other common explanation for suffering, and you can make it this what you will. There are people, this is the belief system, right? If you just take a step back and you try to be the objective Buddhist tantric scholar, you're going to say, yeah, that's one line of explaining it. People have done things that are wrong, therefore they have to be punished, right? That might be even people who don't hold the same beliefs as you. They're obviously wrong in their beliefs. They have to be punished, right? And then you go further, and then you can just say it's mysterious ways. And I think that's what you got. But do you see anything else within that? Those are the two dominant ones I think that you have. But if you have another one, Daniel, I'd be curious.
It's amazing to me that human beings often refuse to take responsibility for their own actions. We attribute all of this death and destruction to a greater power, and yet we refuse absolutely to say, maybe this is our choice. Maybe we want this. Maybe this is what our desire is. And we attribute it to something else to scapegoat it. Like we say, oh, yeah, this is quote unquote God's will. Well, that means you have none. I'm doing God's will. Oh, really? Is that so? Hmm. What's funny, I didn't hear him say that. So who's crazy? You or me? The person who said they heard a voice or the one who didn't? I don't know. You know, the lack of like ownership of your own choices. Why? Fear of the consequences, in my opinion.
Mm,
Fear of being viewed as a monster. Because if they didn't have a book that said that all this shit was going to happen, and someone just said, this is what we're doing, and this is why we're doing it. Because once this happens and this thing happens, then two-thirds of these people die because they don't believe in the same God that we do. That's cool, right? We can't wait for that to happen. That's awesome, you know? And they're gonna go to hell. That's great, right? You'd be like, what the fuck? What are you talking about? Like, are you drinking fucking Drano? Like, I don't understand. Give me a little bit. I want to try it, but like, you know, but because it's like, the will of it's too mysterious. We couldn't even bother. We couldn't even possibly comprehend. So let me go murder thousands of people. I'll be back real quick to talk about how good God is in a minute here, but I'll be right back. This doesn't even make sense. This doesn't even make sense.
it gets to something kind of fascinating, and I like what you're doing with that too. I do think it fits in the context of like what we're talking to. What you're putting then is like putting the locus of responsibility back into the individual actors, and that's a spiritual statement then. The spiritual statement is like you have to look in the mirror and critically think about yourself, your actions, and what they mean. And then like this is a big thing, obviously in tantric Buddhism too. You can't like, and this has come up in different episodes around this too. You can't just like turn off the thinking cells, as you've said in different episodes, and now okay, I'm just going totally on some kind of abstract faith. I don't even know what the fuck it means, but I'm following that. Right? I think what I hear and what you're saying that's like I think speaks to me is like, okay, let's put the locus of responsibility back in the individual actor who now has to have spiritual responsibility for what they're acting
Mm-hmm.
in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and that's a profound move. Let's not keep justifying whatever these things are by giving up our individual aspect of spiritual responsibility
Mm-hmm.
or individual aspect of like thinking critically. Again, back to the theme of our deal, we do this little spirituality podcast. There's a really famous kind of Buddhist thing. Don't believe something just because I told you. Test it. Test it like as if you were trading me for gold and you wanted to see if my gold was real. You wouldn't just do it for nothing. You'd test it and be critically thinking about it. So that moves that responsibility back, right? And you have to
Mm-hmm.
then have like a personal responsibility around that. I like it. It's
Yeah.
good, right?
Yeah.
Um, okay. Well, the Gnostic version of this, and then maybe we'll look at like the other major thing. I was like kind of going through as I was prepping my notes for myself, and I was thinking, well, how do people think about this aspect of suffering, right? Philosophically, this is called the problem. If you're talking about divinity, the problem of theodicy. If God is all good and all powerful, why is this such a shit show? You got to figure it
Mm-hmm.
out. The proto-orthodox thing is it's like this because this divinity is either pissed off at us or doing something mysterious that we don't understand, right? And we can't critically think about that. As we've talked about, well, I guess we could I guess we pause it, right? You want to like leave it here, or should we go? I got another five, maybe. What do you think,
Let's do
Tim?
five. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so okay, let me give the other major one that's like common in the culture,
Yeah.
and then maybe we'll do the Gnostic one. So I wanted to contrast this a little bit with like scientific materialism because I was
Yeah.
thinking about
Yeah.
this. These are
Yeah.
different interpretations of like what's going wrong. If you're a scientific materialist person, the weird thing about that, and we can debate this from a spiritual point of view, is that there is no problem per se, right? There are just lots of problems. There's not some deeper mystery of why they're suffering, some deeper philosophical or spiritual thing to crack. There's just, okay, the universe is sort of statistical and random and chaotic with no particular underlying meaning or order. So to the extent that they're suffering in pain, or what the Buddhists would call dukkha, the problem of like pain, suffering, unsatisfaction, well, shit goes up and down. It's kind of a random world. And so, that's that reaction. Now, I think we have to have that in contrast with like other things, but that's sort of that. That's a dominant kind of thing within our worldview too. And so I think it's just worthwhile explaining that.
I don't think, Eric, I don't even think it's in contrast, to be totally honest.
Well, that's interesting. Okay, yeah. Make the pitch,
Reason
please.
being is that, like, let's just say, okay, that you are, deciding to invade another country and murder lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of people. And you're saying, this is the will of the Creator. I am merely a vessel for his hand. Okay. But then people might, your detractors, who knows how few of them there are, but your detractors would say, but what about all those innocent lives? And then you may use the argument of that's what happens. That's which in and of itself is based on randomness. So
Yeah.
that's how the universe works. I don't know. What am I going to say? Do you know what I mean? Like the forward momentum of what it is that I am doing. So like God's will is moving me. It's his intent is moving me to do these terrible things. And then what comes of those terrible things? Well, that's just you were born in the wrong place. What can I say? You're just, you're part of this thing. So I actually don't think that those two things are in contrast at all. I think that they're part and parcel of the same kernel.
I think this is a genius move to end an episode on building to a powerful conclusion in a G&T way. Because in the way I agree, I hear what you're saying. In either case, you can end up with the situation of saying, um, well, either way, it's random and chaotic and fucked up, and that's just how it is. you know, whether it's the will of the some creator that I can't understand that wants this to happen, or is empowering me to do these things, I guess, or whether it's just a bunch of rando shit happens and well, that's too bad that happened to those people, but whatever. There still is that underlying thing of like randomness that went through.
Hmm.
I'm reminded of like I had put these existential philosophers in here for a reason, building to our big conclusion. And there's Jean-Paul Sartre, famous philosopher, right?
Hmm.
Existential philosopher. And he said, what's interesting about this is that you had this sort of what we'll call proto-orthodox religious worldview, right? And then at a certain point, you got another people who developed another worldview, and they were really the same.
Mm.
In the one situation, you just took out the God, and then you put in like random acts of materialistic nature, but either way you got to the same spot, right? All of it stayed kind of the same, and that's what popped in my mind when you were saying that, right? There's a
Hmm.
way in which like what happened to people, I guess you'd say psychospiritually, is you had the one thing we're under the control of a capricious kind of odd divinity that's tossing us around. Okay, cool. We'll take that away. We're under the control of a capricious, odd, rando universe that's tossing our shit around. And either way, we got to the same place. That was sort of his point, right? And maybe that's a great way to end an episode because I think you're right. I think, if you want to get really deep, I suppose, to my mind, psychospiritually, there's something, if you want to be a psychospiritual person, we do. Anyone who would be listening to this, I assume they want to do the same, right? There's something off about both of those mindsets, right? And part of it is they come off of the same tree, even like what you're talking about. So I like it. I think that's like you watch all of Pulp Fiction, some movie, and you get to the end and it ends satisfying. I'm satisfied with that. You know? And I suppose if you want to like talk from, I don't know, we're feisty this episode, but if you want to talk from the sort of spiritual things that we're trying to share, right? The traditions that we're trying to share, and it doesn't have to be just Buddhist Tantra, it could be any of the ones that, let's say, have a kinder heart, right? Any of these, like you have to snap out of all of this stuff, you know?
Yeah.
All right, that seems good. I'm satisfied with that as an ending. Thanks,
Yeah.
Dave. I like
Yeah.
it. It
No.
came together in a nice way.
Yeah, for sure. Audience, thank you so much for tuning in. Eric, thanks for, being a co-pilot on this crazy ship. If you've made it to this point of the episode, thank you so much. Your attention span is that of a very small percentage of people in the world who can keep their attention for this long. Because the way that things are going, the videos on TikTok are going to just be 1.5 seconds. Just going to be somebody screaming, and that's going to be it. That'll be that's all that they'll be, you know.
Just the minute,
Um,
like second and a half fart song, and then a sound, and it'll end, and that'll be it. Yeah,
Yeah, that'll be it, right? But we do appreciate everybody tuning in and listening or watching or however you're consuming our content. Please feel free to leave a like or a video, a comment on the video, or hit that hype button, subscribe, send us an email at the Gin and Tantra podcast at gmail.com or gin and tantra at gmail.com. The Gin and Tantra podcast on Instagram. Or if you know one of us, send us a text message. We love to talk about this shit just in real life. I mean, these are conversations that we're having with each other, that we're having with our friends and loved ones and maybe even enemies. About this stuff in general, and then we bring it here and we share with everybody else in hopes that they feel like other people are having these kinds of conversations, because I don't know how many people are, but we are, and we're certainly grateful for having everybody who's been tuning in, whether today is your first or your 300th episode. We appreciate it. So as Eric said earlier, this is a labor of love. So thanks everybody for tuning in. Eric, muchas gracias. Audience, we'll catch you in the next one. Peace.